Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And interesting things happening in the Arctic, of course. I've been updating you on the Torstein Vidal posts. Haven't seen anything new or any updates on that particular post since then. Friend and viewer sent me an interesting video from Margot's Healing Corner. Hold on, let me get this right. Margot's Healing Corner. She has a video basically showing on Climate Reanalyzer a large hole in the Arctic sea ice. And then I went to go check it out myself. And there was actually a hole, but in a different place, a smaller hole. And it looked like what was the large hole was just super, super thin ice. So maybe it closed back up a little more or something. I don't know, but it looks very, very thin. The entire Arctic ice cap looks really thin. So keep an eye on that. We will keep an eye on that in the next week or so, as we near the bottom of the Arctic ice season, the low point of the Arctic ice extent. How low can you go? So let me just start with, I don't know if any of you are following this. This has been ongoing for the last couple of days. Floods and landslides leave dozens dead and 50 missing in Japan. So they're experiencing some craziness. Dozens of people have died and at least 50 are missing after torrential rain triggered landslides and flash flooding in western Japan on Saturday. Local authorities said 20 people have been killed, while public broadcaster NHK said the death toll had risen to 46. The number of casualties is expected to rise, said Yoshinobu Katsuura, a disaster management official in Ehime Prefecture, or Ehime. The Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, said the situation was extremely serious and ordered ministers to make an all-out effort to rescue victims. The rainfall has hampered rescue operations in Hiroshima, Ehime, Okayama, Kyoto, and other regions. Water levels reached 5 meters in the worst-hit areas, forcing some residents onto rooftops and balconies to attract the attention of rescue helicopters. Almost 2 million people, mainly in western Japan, have been told to evacuate their homes, according to the Fire and Disaster Management Agency, but NHK said the figure had risen to nearly 3.2 million. That is a lot of evacuations. Some areas have been hit by more than 1 meter of rain, while almost 48,000 soldiers, police, and firefighters have been deployed for rescue operations, said the chief cabinet secretary, Yoshihide Suga. Another 21,000 troops are on standby. The Japan Meteorological Agency upgraded its alert system to the highest level, only issued when the amount of rain is expected to be the highest in decades in large areas of western Japan, while lifting the warning in other regions. Among the missing were 5 people buried when houses collapsed in Hiroshima Prefecture. In Ehime Prefecture, a woman was found dead on the second floor of a home hit by a landslide. So serious devastation going on in Japan over the last couple of days. And as we have seen over the last year, at least year, the number of fatal and disastrous flooding incidences worldwide has increased to something of a monumental level. We're just not getting coverage of this everywhere. And I wanted to also say, I saw something on CBS News. Somebody sent me a link from a CBS News clip, and they were talking about the heat waves going on in the U.S. and the meteorologist just basically flat out, said this is climate change, coming at us. And so I was fairly amazed that this was a national news service and somebody just, making the connection straight off and saying this is what's going on. Very rare, but very necessary. And I feel like we're going to see a lot more of this, because how long can you suppress the obviousness of this situation? You can't. It's just going to get so ridiculous. You can't keep, just individuating every single, occurrence. Oh my God, there's these floods. Why is this happening? This is amazing. Oh, all these heat waves. What, this is really, out of the ordinary. Yet another 1 in 1,000-year flood this year. Gosh, what could it be? Come on, guys. Give me some answers. Moving on to a piece in the Arctic News. Can we weather the danger zone? This is from July 1st. I believe Osama sent me this link. As an earlier Arctic News analysis shows, Earth may have long crossed the 1.5C guardrail set at the Paris Agreement. Earth may have already been in the danger zone since early 2014. This is shown by the image on the right associated with the analysis, which is based on NASA data that are adjusted to reflect a pre-industrial baseline air temperatures and Arctic temperatures. As the added third-order polynomial trend shows, the world may also be crossing the higher 2C guardrail later this year. While temperatures threaten to keep rising dramatically beyond that point, what is the threat? As described as the threat, much carbon is stored in large and vulnerable pools that have until now been kept stable by low temperatures, i.e. methane. The threat is that rapid temperature rise will hit vulnerable carbon pools hard, making them release huge amounts of greenhouse gases, further contributing to the acceleration of the temperature rise. Further release of greenhouse gases will obviously further speed up warming. In addition, there are further warming elements that could result in very rapid acceleration of the temperature rise, as discussed at the extinction page. The danger zone. Below are some images illustrating just how dire the situation is, illustrating how vulnerable carbon pools are getting hit exactly as feared they would be with a further rise in temperature. On July 5th, 2018, it was as hot as 33.5 C or 92.3 Fahrenheit on the coast of the Arctic Ocean in Siberia at top green circle. Further inland, it was as hot as 34.2 C or 93.5 Fahrenheit at bottom green circle at 68.6 north. The satellite image below shows smoke from fires over parts of Siberia hit strongly by heat waves. The fires caused carbon monoxide levels as high as 20,309 parts per billion over Siberia. Methane levels that day were as high as 22,809 parts per billion, very close to 3,000 parts per billion of methane. The Copernicus image below shows aerosol forecasts for July 4th, 2018, due to biomass burning. Another Copernicus forecast shows high ozone levels over Siberia and East Siberian Sea. EPA 8-hour ozone standard is 70 parts per billion, and here's a report on recent U.S. ozone levels. global 10-day, See Wikipedia for more on strong local and immediate warming impacts of ozone and how it also makes vegetation more vulnerable to fires. The global 10-day forecast below, run on July 3rd, 2018 with maximum 2-meter temperature, shows that things may get even worse over the coming week or more. Could we move out of the danger zone? What can be done to improve the dire situation? One obvious line of action is to make more effort to reduce emissions that are causing warming. There's no doubt that this can be achieved and has numerous benefits, as described in an earlier post. Emission cuts can be achieved by implementing effective policies to facilitate changes in energy use, in diet and in land use and construction practices, etc. One complication is that the necessary transition away from fossil fuels is unlikely to result in immediate falls in temperatures. This is the case because there will be less sulfur in the atmosphere to reflect sunlight back into space, global dimming. Furthermore, there could also be an increase in biomass burning, and as discussed at the aerosols page, while the full wrath of recent carbon dioxide emissions is yet to come, as said, the resulting rise in temperature threatens to trigger numerous feedbacks that could accelerate the temperature rise even further. For more on how much temperatures could rise, see the extinction page. While it's clear that besides emission cuts, further action is necessary, such as removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and oceans, the prospect is that such a removal will have to continue for decades and decades to come before it can bring greenhouse gases down to safer levels. To further combat warming, there are additional lines of action to be looked at. But as long as politicians remain reluctant to even consider pursuing efforts to reduce emissions, we can expect the world to be in the danger zone for a long time to come. The situation is dire. It calls for comprehensive and effective action as described in the climate plan. Indeed. So this is what has to happen, what must happen if we are to escape total and utter annihilation. Many things have to happen at once, of course. But we're talking about steering the Titanic that is chugging along at a very fast clip away from this iceberg. And we are inches away from this iceberg. So the question is it possible? And the answer is we don't know unless we try, right? Is it possible? Plenty of people will say probably not. But the answer is we have no idea unless we actually try. That means recalibrating, refitting our entire paradigm, our entire mindset, and our entire state of current political, sociological organization. We have to really rearrange everything for any of this to work, any plan. When should we do this? Right now. How should we do this? Talk to people, elect different people, find ways to get away from the money system, find ways to get the money system away from you and out of your politics and out of your life, at any and every level. Maybe not just the money system, but just, what would you call it? Predatory capitalism, environmentally destructive capitalism, resource snatching capitalism. There could be a million words for this, but we need to greatly shrink our footprints on this planet, and we need to figure out ways to mitigate the disasters that will come because of that. Anyways, moving on. This is how your world could end. This is from The Guardian. This is from September 9th, 2017. Somebody sent me this. I don't know if I'm going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to kind of get into it for a little bit. In an extract from his book, Ends of the World, Peter Brannon examines mass extinction events and the catastrophic outcome of rising temperatures for all the world's population. Many of us share some dim apprehension that the world is flying out of control, that the center cannot hold. Raging wildfires, once in 1,000-year storms, lethal heat waves have become fixtures of the evening news, and all this after the planet has warmed by less than 1 C above pre-industrial temperatures. But here's where it gets really scary. If humanity burns through all its fossil fuel reserves, there is potential to warm the planet by as much as 18 C and raise sea levels by hundreds of feet. This is a warming spike of an even greater magnitude than that so far measured for the end Permian mass extinction. If the worst case scenarios come to pass, today's modestly menacing ocean climate system will seem quaint. Even warming to 1/4 of that amount would create a planet that would have nothing to do with the one on which humans evolved or on which civilization has been built. The last time it was 4 C warmer, there was no ice at either pole, and sea level was 80 meters higher than it is today. I met University of New Hampshire paleoclimatologist Matthew Huber at a dinner near his campus in Durham, New Hampshire. Huber has spent a sizable portion of his research career studying the hothouse of the early mammals, and he thinks that in the coming centuries, we might be heading back to the Eocene climate of 50 million years ago, when there was Alaskan palm trees and alligators splashed in the Arctic Circle. The modern world will be much more of a killing field, he said. Habit fragmentation today will make it much more difficult to migrate. But if we limit it below 2 C of warming, at least you won't have widespread heat death. In 2010, Huber and his co-author, Stephen Sherwood, published one of the most ominous science papers in recent memory, An Adaptability Limit to Climate Change Due to Heat Stress. And that pretty much sums it up. Lizards will be fine. Birds will be fine, Huber said, noting that life has thrived in hotter climates than even the most catastrophic projections for anthropogenic global warming. This is one reason to suspect that the collapse of civilization might come long before we reach a proper biological mass extinction. Life has endured conditions that would be unthinkable for a highly networked global society partitioned by political borders. Of course, we're understandably concerned about the fate of civilization, and Huber says that, mass extinction or not, it's our tenuous reliance on the aging and inadequate infrastructure, perhaps most ominously on power grids, coupled with the limits of human physiology, that may well bring down our world. In 1977, when power went out for only one summer day in New York, swaths of the city devolved in something like Hobbes's man in a state of nature. Hobbes's man. Riots swept across the city. Thousands of businesses were destroyed by looters, and arsonists lit more than 1,000 fires. In 2012, when the monsoon failed in India, as it's expected to do in a warmer world, 670 million people, that is 10% of the global population, lost access to power when the grid was crippled by unusually high demand from farmers struggling to irrigate their fields, while the high temperature sent many Indians seeking kilowatt-chugging air conditioning. The problem is that humans can't even handle a hot week today without the power grid failing on a regular basis, he said, noting that the aging patchwork power grid in the United States was built with components that are allowed to languish for more than a century before being replaced. What makes people think it's going to be any better when the average summer temperature will be what today is the hottest week of the year in a 5-year period, and the hottest temperature will be in the range that no one has ever experienced before in the United States. That's 2050. By 2050, according to a 2014 MIT study, there will also be 5 billion people living in water-stressed areas. 30 to 50 years from now, more or less, the water wars are going to start, Huber said. In their book, Dire Predictions, Penn State's Lee Kump and Michael Mann describe just one local example of how drought, sea level rise, and overpopulation may combine to pop the rivets off civilization. Increasingly, severe drought in West Africa will generate a mass migration from the highly populous interior of Nigeria to its coastal megacity, Lagos. Already threatened by rising sea levels, Lagos will be unable to accommodate this massive influx of people. Squabbling over the dwindling oil reserves in the Niger River Delta, combined with potential for state corruption, will add to the factors contributing to massive social unrest. Massive social unrest here being a rather bloodless phrase masking the utter chaos coming to a country already riven by corruption and religious violence. It's sort of the nightmare scenario, said Huber. None of the economists is modeling what happens to a country's GDP if 10% of the population is refugees sitting in refugee camps. But look at the real world. What happens if one person who is doing labor in China has to move to Kazakhstan where they aren't working? In an economic model, they'd be immediately put to work, but in the real world, they just sit there and get pissed. If people don't have an economic hope and they're displaced, they tend to get mad and blow things up. It's the kind of world in which the major institutions, including nations as a whole, have their existence threatened by mass migration. That's where I see things heading by mid-century. And you're wondering why Trump is talking about a wall. It ain't illegal immigration. It's the fact that we're going to have massive immigration, possibly in both directions. Think about that. A while ago, if y'all don't know who Cliff High is, Cliff High was talking about some of his reports coming back stating that we were actually going to see immigration going the other way into Mexico out of the United States, like if the grid collapsed or if, the economy totally collapsed and people were trying to get away from some very scary situations, you could see a mass migration of Americans going the other way. So, don't let the wall come back and bite you in the butt. It doesn't get any better after 2050, but forecasts about the disintegration of society are social and political speculations that have nothing to do with mass extinctions. Huber is more interested in the hard limits of biology. He wants to know when humans themselves will actually start to disintegrate. His 2010 paper on the subject was inspired by a chance meeting with a colleague. I presented a paper at a conference about how hot tropical temperatures were in the geological past, and Steve Sherwood was in the audience. He's a climate scientist from the University of New South Wales. He heard my talk and he started asking himself the very basic question: how hot and humid can it get before things start dying? It was literally just an order of magnitude kind of question. I guess he thought about it and realized that he didn't know the answer, and he wasn't sure anyone else did either. Our paper really wasn't motivated by the future climate per se, because when we started, we didn't know if there was any kind of realistic future climate state that would fall within this habitability limit, excuse me. Say that 20 times fast. When we started, it was just like, we don't know. Maybe you have to go to like 50 C global mean temperature. Then we ran a whole set of model results, and it was rather alarming to us. Sherwood and Huber calculated their temperature threshold using the so-called wet bulb temperature, which basically measures how much you can cool off at a given temperature. If humidity is high, for instance, things like sweat and wind are less effective at cooling you down, and the wet bulb temperature accounts for this. If you take a meteorology class, the wet bulb temperature is calculated by basically taking a glass thermometer, putting it in a tight wet sock, and swinging it around your head, he said. So when you assume that this temperature limit applies to a human, you're really kind of imagining a gale force wind blowing on a naked human being who's doused in water and there's no sunlight. They're immobile and actually not doing anything other than basal metabolism. Today, the most common maximums for wet bulb temperatures around the world are 26 C to 27 C. Wet bulb temperatures of 35 C or higher are lethal to humanity. Above this limit, it is impossible for humans to dissipate the heat they generate indefinitely, and they die of overheating in a matter of hours, no matter how hard they try to cool off. So we're here trying to get across the point that physiology and the adaptation and these other things will have nothing to do with this limit. It's the easy bake oven limit, he said. You cook yourself very slowly. What that means is that this limit is likely far too generous for human survivability. When you do real modeling, you hit a limit much sooner because human beings aren't wet socks, he said. According to Huber and Sherwood's modeling, 7 C of warming would begin to render large parts of the globe lethally hot to mammals. 7 C, huh? I think it might be a lot lower than that. Continue warming past that, and truly huge swaths of the planet currently inhabited by humans would exceed 35°C wet bulb temperatures and would have to be abandoned. Otherwise, the people who live there would be literally cooked to death. People are always like, oh, well, can't we adapt? And you can, up to a point, he said. It's just after that point that I'm talking about. Already in today's world, heated less than 1°C above pre-industrial times, heat waves have assumed a new deadly demeanor. 2003, 2 hot weeks killed 30,000 people in Europe. 30,000. I think I said 3,000 a couple videos ago. It was called a once in 500 year event. It happened again 3 years later, 497 years ahead of schedule. In 2010, a heat wave killed 15,000 people in Russia. 15,000 people. In 2015, nearly 700 people died in Karachi alone from a heat wave that struck Pakistan while many were fasting for Ramadan. But these tragic episodes are barely a shade of what's projected. In the near term, 2050 or 2070, well, let's just say 2025 or 2030, the U.S. Midwest is going to be one of the hardest hit, said Huber. There's a plume of warm, moist air that heads up through the central interior of the U.S. during just the right season, and man, it is hot and sticky. You just add a couple of degrees and it gets really hot and sticky. These are the thresholds, right? These aren't just like smooth functions. It gets above a certain number and you hurt yourself. You hurt yourself very badly. This is a really good article, and I don't really want to stop reading it. Maybe I'll try to go to the end. China, Brazil, and Africa face similarly infernal forecasts, while already sweltering Middle East has what Huber calls existential problems. The first flickers of the slow-motion catastrophe might be familiar to Europeans struggling to accommodate the tens of thousands of refugees at their borders. The collapse and mass migration of Syrian society came after a punishing 4-year drought. Still, others have noted that the Hajj, which brings 2 million religious pilgrims to Mecca each year, will be a physically impossible religious obligation to fulfill due to the limits of heat stress in the region in just a few decades or sooner. But if the very worst case emission scenarios, heat waves would not merely be a public health crisis or a threat multiplier, as the Pentagon calls global warming. Humanity would have to abandon most of the earth it now inhabits. We're just going to have to leave this place. In their paper, Huber and Sherwood write, if warmings of 10°C were really to occur in the next 3 centuries, the area of land likely rendered uninhabitable by heat stress would dwarf that affected by rising sea level. Huber asked, if you ask any school child what were mammals doing in the age of the dinosaurs, they'd say they were living underground and coming out at night. Why? Well, heat stress is a very simple explanation. Interestingly, birds have a higher set point temperature. Ours is 37°C. Birds is more like 41°C. So I actually think that that's a very deep evolutionary relic right there, because the wet bulb temperature was probably maxing out around 41°C in the Cretaceous, not 37°C. Back at the diner in New Hampshire, Huber told me about his favorite story, the U.S. Army's real-life parable of the so-called motivated point man. In 1996, a platoon of light infantry spent days in the Puerto Rican jungle acclimatizing to stifling heat and humidity, cautiously monitoring their water intake before simulating a nighttime raid. The platoon included some of the most fit and motivated soldiers in the battalion. When the evening of the raid came, the platoon leader began leading his troops through the jungle, macheting a path through the bush. Before long, he was felled by fatigue and delegated his leadership to an underling. When the second private failed to advance the platoon quickly enough, the platoon leader demanded to lead again. But soon he found himself hyperthermic and unable to walk. His soldiers had to douse him in cold water and supply him with intravenous infusions. Eventually, 4 soldiers had to carry him. Before long, the extra demands vitiated the entire platoon, all of whom began to fall prey to heat stress. The exercise had to be called off before it became a massacre. So I look at it. I look at that as, if it's nighttime and acclimatized, fit people can just disintegrate into a pool of useless people on stretchers. That's what I see happening to society, to cultures, Huber said. If you want to know how mass extinction happens, that's how. So when people talk about the Pleistocene megafauna extinctions and Clovis people, sometimes they act like it's a mystery how these things happen. But it happens in exactly the same way. You have something tearing apart the strongest members. The weaker ones try to fill in the gaps. They're really not strong enough to take it, and the whole thing collapses. You want to know how societies collapse, Huber said? That's how. Excellent article. And that really points to a very near-term problem that we're going to be facing, I think, sooner than 2050 or 2070, honestly. I believe Guy McPherson said at 4C, we're done. So then they're talking about 7C or 10C. I don't see how we actually survive past 2 or 3C, as evidenced by the things that are hitting us right now, and we're supposedly at 1 or 2. We're in between 1 or 2 right now, and the things that are hitting us right now are getting very close to lethal situations. I mean, they are lethal situations for many, but for lethal situations on a massive scale. So between 2 and 3C is that when we see things really, really starting to fall apart. I'll let y'all be the judge of that. I can say that I don't think that I don't think that we have much of a chance unless we are finding some way to mitigate the effects of this heat. One of my commenters, I believe Gigabane, is talking about about getting us planning on living underground, and I'm sure that the rich and the military and the elite already understand that this is where we're going to have to go, as evidenced again in this article, where were mammals living underground. We're going to have to do something. We're going to have to create another living arrangement, because this living arrangement isn't going to work, and very, very soon it's not going to work. And I'm not saying that to be doomy. I'm saying that to be like, realistically, this is where we're at. So if we're going to do something different, if we're going to survive, we're going to have to do something different. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Hope to be back with another video tomorrow or very soon. Until next time, peace.